Good morning. It was 40 years ago. I was in the last 6 months of a 3-year research project at St Vincent's Hospital in the Department of Immunology, looking at atopic disease, allergies and eczema and asthma, those sorts of things, trying to find a way through. We were building on some of the work my boss had done overseas, but it didn't go very far. The AIDS epidemic broke in, and my boss had brought back the techniques and research and diagnostic methods, and our department was at the centre of it. And so all the energy and time and effort of the department was really poured into this really significant epidemic. So I got towards the end and thought, what next? That 3 years was a fairly tumultuous 3 years, some really good things and some really hard, dark things. I was engaged and married, really good. My mum was diagnosed with terminal illness and died just before I finished the project, actually, just before the 3 years. Really hard time. And there were lots of transitions and changes. And I was looking about what next. And through that time, I'd explored, in some ways, where to from here. The natural course was to do more study, to increase my credentials in science and go further and look for new possibilities. And I was thinking through what next. And I guess in some ways, there was a deeper yearning that went beneath all that led me in other ways to look at other opportunities, other possibilities. And one was really quite countercultural. I'd been involved in the church loosely through a Sunday morning program since I was very young. But towards the end of my teens, I became involved in the senior youth group and then church and leading youth ministry and music, into music. And I studied to be a lay preacher. I was preaching in the congregations. It was a really big part of my life outside work. And really interesting, and I was learning things. One of the areas in the youth group was this really diverse bunch of kids, and particularly a group of young blokes whose lives were very different, who were wrestling with really deep and dark issues, and exposing me to a broader side, a different side of life, and what that meant, and how to support and care and be in that space. Working in the Department of Immunology, where there was so much of the compassion, the care, the suffering side of AIDS and the people side, and how the staff and the hospital were really caring over and against much of the wider society that was judgmental against people with AIDS, and holding those sort of questions. And I was asking some deeper things about myself. I was still in my early 20s. And so I went along to my minister with some possibilities to talk through. Had some lists of things, and he went through and he looked at them and crossed a lot of the things off and explained why. And there was one bit that was, I kind of know why it was there, but it was ministry. And it came from somewhere else. Like, it was not a natural thing for me and my family. Church was not part of our life until I started going. And it was sort of countercultural, because to do it would mean, to go to theological college would mean to leave work and have no income, except to live off Susan's income for 3 years, which would put us behind in, getting the house and the family and all those things that you expect. It was also a very countercultural course. Not many people go into theological college and into ministry. The progression would be science and more science, and the areas of science opening up. Anyway, we talked, and he focused on that and said, "I think you'd be really good, and I think that's where you're called to be." And he used that phrase, and that was new or unusual to me. But I learned that's a very particular word and sense in the church, that God calls us. Now, I hadn't heard voices, I hadn't heard God speak, it hadn't jumped out at me. But as I reflected back, there was this deeper yearning, this sense of movement, this sense of drawing me into something different, new, another way, something that touched me deeply. Anyway, I went away from that conversation with the minister, and he's encouraged me to think about that. It was a day, one of those Rosser days off we used to have, and I went for a walk with the dog, and I was pondering it and thinking it, and I prayed and said, God, look, if this is the right way, if this is what you want, let's do it. And suddenly I just felt this sense of affirmation. Yeah, that's it. This is what I've got to do. This is the way. And I can't describe it any other way, but that was a sense of yes, and that God was in this moment somehow. I talked over with Susan, and she went and talked to the minister about what this meant for all of us, and off I went to college. And as I said, Mum had died just before I finished the project and therefore started college. And so the 3 years of college was a really dynamic time of transformation, of looking at life and being of the world, and this call, this way of God, and what God calls us to be and do in the world. I was exposed to a whole new people from overseas who were coming, Sri Lankan people who were caught up in the war and the chaos there, and sharing stories of things that I'd never really comprehended. I heard stories, all sorts of stories, and I was experiencing things, and I went into places and experienced things that took me deeper into life and being, and asked deeper questions, and confirmed that this is where I needed to be. It was still a long journey, and I was never convinced that I would go into a congregation somewhere. That seemed a step too far, too countercultural, too far away from my experience and who I was. But by the time I got to third year, I remember one day just thinking, I can do this. And again, there was that sense of affirmation, yeah, you can. Part of the whole process was to go through the church's processes, and they all asked me my sense of call, to tell the story of how I got to this, of all the doubts and the questions and the wrestling, and looking in all different directions and denying this, whereas it was always there as a deep part of me. This week we read a story which has been a really important story for me along the way, the call of Abraham, or Abram as he was, Abram and his wife Sarai. They were living in Haran, and God spoke to them. A simple story, God spoke to them and said, leave everything, your home, your family, everything, pack up your herds and flock, maidservants, manservants, and go. Go to the place that I'll tell you. They were given a direction, and off they went. They packed everything up and went. And it's a totally countercultural story in the context of our society, to hear this story of a man who packs up everything, his whole life, and journeys out of the known into the unknown, out of the place where there's some control and definition and security, and you know what's going to happen generally, into a place you don't even know where you're going. You don't know what it's going to be like or who you're going to meet. You're leaving the people who you know, the people who are your people, and venturing into a world that is unknown with people who are different. It's such a countercultural way. And it's about letting go of your security, letting go of your control, letting go of what holds you together in your life, and going into an unknown place. It's a story that challenges me and inspires me, because I see something of myself in that journey. I see something of all of us, because that is the call of God on all of our lives, to inviting us out of what we know and what we're comfortable with into a place where we're not so comfortable, where we don't know what's happening and we can't control it. And we have to trust in this God who is at the heart of everything. And Abram and Sarai journey, and in the journey, which basically is their life, there is no destination really. It's their life is the journey. it makes me understand that life is a journey. I mean, after all, what is our destination? When do we arrive? Where do we arrive? Most of us think that having the house that's our castle, and accumulating wealth and power and status and career and whatever else, we've made it. But we never feel we've made it because there's always more to get or more to do, more experiences. And we never quite arrive because life is not a destination, it's a journey. And I see in my own life this constant call forward out of what I know and what I can control into an unknown place. And there's a sense of powerlessness that goes with that and giving up control, and that's not easy. And I know that making this decision to go to college was exciting in one way, but really scary in another way. How would we survive and live, and what would it mean, and where would we end up? We end up leaving our home, our family, our community, the people we knew, and moving half an hour away, which isn't far in the scheme of things, but it was a different world. This story invites us into this place of faith, of trusting God. Not trusting what we can control, not trusting what we know, not trusting what we can do. All of that's there. But trusting what God might do with that in a new place, in a new way. And it's inviting us into a countercultural way in the world. To let go of violence, to let go of wealth, to let go of prosperity, to let go of those things we cling to because we think we need them. And to trust in another way that's grounded in love, that's grounded in justice and inclusion, that's grounded in peace and generosity and sharing and caring. It's grounded in opening our vision to include and our lives to include those who are different. Those who are different in culture, in language, in faith, in politics, in experience. And to understand ourselves as human beings in this world, sharing this life together, and trusting that the God who holds all things will hold us. That's what we're invited to do, all of us. And it's not just a call into ordained ministry. It's just one possibility. But how do we live within a corporation that we work for? Or as a nurse or a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher or a garbage collector or as a parent or as a child, as a brother, a sister, a friend? How do we live in this world well in this way of God? That's what we're invited into, and that's what we're challenged to do. And I think this story of Abram and Sarai continues to inspire, challenge, confront, and invite me on. What about you? Amen.